It was the year 1587, a time when the world was vast, uncharted, and filled with promise. Across the restless waves of the Atlantic, England's ambition burned brighter than ever. The Spanish ruled the seas with their golden galleons, returning home heavy with treasures from the New World. Queen Elizabeth I wanted her share of that glory, and beyond gold, she hungered for something more enduring, an English colony in the Americas. The man chosen to lead this dream was John White, an artist, explorer, and a man of quiet determination. White wasn't just an adventurer chasing fortune, he was a visionary. He believed in a new beginning, a settlement where families could live, trade, and thrive under the English crown. And so, in early 1587, 3 ships set sail from Portsmouth, carrying 117 settlers, men, women, and children, bound for the land that promised both freedom and peril. Among them was Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, heavily pregnant and full of hope. The settlers believed they were heading to Chesapeake Bay, a region rumored to be fertile and safer than the treacherous islands explored before. But fate had other plans. After weeks at sea, their fleet arrived near the coast of what is now North Carolina. The air was thick with salt and uncertainty. The captain, perhaps weary from the voyage or wary of enemy ships, refused to go farther north. Instead, he left the colonists at a familiar site, Roanoke Island, the very same place where a previous English settlement had mysteriously failed just 2 years earlier. The land was eerily silent. The remains of the old fort stood like skeletons against the horizon, walls splintered, structures rotted, and no trace of the men who had once lived there. It was as if the wilderness itself had swallowed them whole. Still, the settlers had little choice. They began rebuilding, setting up houses, and planting what crops they could before the summer heat turned cruel. The days were long, and the nights whispered with unseen dangers, the rustle of leaves, the howl of wolves, and the distant drums of nearby native tribes. Relations with the local tribes were uncertain at best, some offered food and guidance, others glared from the shadows, remembering the harsh treatment from earlier English expeditions. Despite the fear, there was life, and even joy. In August, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a baby girl, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Her cries echoed through the settlement, a fragile symbol of hope in a land that seemed determined to resist them. Yet as the weeks passed, that hope began to fade. Supplies ran dangerously low. Crops withered in the relentless heat. The settlers' relationship with nearby tribes worsened. Hunger, sickness, and isolation began to take hold. They were thousands of miles from home, stranded between the endless sea and a vast, unknown wilderness. John White knew they would not survive without help. Reluctantly, he decided to return to England, to bring back food, tools, and reinforcements. As he set sail, he promised his daughter and the colonists that he would return quickly. But across that endless ocean, time conspired against him. War had broken out between England and Spain. The seas filled with Spanish warships, and England's ships were seized for battle. John White's pleas fell on deaf ears, he could not find passage back to his colony. 1 year turned into 2, then 3. By the time he finally secured a ship and returned to Roanoke in 1590, the colony had vanished. But that's another chapter in this haunting tale. For now, we remember the beginning, the courage, the dream, and the moment when hope first touched the shores of a mysterious new world. A dream that would become the greatest unsolved mystery in American history, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. When John White stepped onto the deck of the ship bound for England, he carried more than supplies to request, he carried the weight of 117 souls, each depending on him to return. The year was 1587, and behind him, on the shores of Roanoke Island, he left his daughter Eleanor Dare, her husband, and his infant granddaughter Virginia, the first English child born in the New World. As the sails caught the Atlantic wind, White turned one last time toward the receding coastline. The faint shapes of the settlement blurred into the mist, a cluster of fragile hopes surrounded by a vast, unforgiving wilderness. He didn't know then that it would be the last time he ever saw them. The journey back to England was long and perilous. The Atlantic, as always, was a restless creature. Tempests roared, waves broke like thunder, and the sea seemed to mock the small ships daring to cross its endless expanse. But White's mission was clear: return quickly with supplies and reinforcements before the harsh winter fell upon the colony. When he finally reached England, his heart sank. The nation was on the brink of war. Spain, the most powerful empire of the age, was preparing to invade. The Spanish Armada threatened England's very survival. Every available ship, every capable sailor, was summoned by Queen Elizabeth I to defend the homeland. White pleaded with merchants, begged the crown, and sought help from old allies in Sir Walter Raleigh's circle. But in a time of war, no one could spare ships for a distant colony. The Queen herself forbade all private voyages, fearing they might weaken England's defenses. White's pleas were drowned out by the drums of war. Days turned to months. Months turned to years. He could do nothing but wait, haunted by the image of his daughter's face and the cries of baby Virginia carried by the ocean wind. Did they have food? Shelter? Were they safe? Or had the wild swallowed them, as it had the settlers before them? Then came 1588, the year of the Spanish Armada. The English navy, small but cunning, triumphed against all odds, scattering the mighty fleet with fire and fury. The nation rejoiced, but for John White, joy was hollow. Amid the celebrations, he seized his chance. Finally, in 1590, after 3 long years of frustration, White secured passage aboard a privateer fleet heading toward the Caribbean. They agreed to drop him near Roanoke on their way home. But even that journey was cursed. Storms battered the ships. Pirates prowled the seas. Twice, White's ship was damaged and forced to turn back. Time, it seemed, was his cruelest enemy. When at last he reached the coast of the New World, his heart pounded with desperate hope. He could almost see them, Eleanor, Virginia, the colonists waving from the shore, their suffering finally over. The sound of surf against sand filled the air as the landing boats approached Roanoke Island. But as White stepped ashore, something was wrong. The settlement was silent. No laughter. No movement. No smoke from cooking fires. The fort's palisades stood weathered and empty, overgrown with vines and silence. Houses were stripped bare, not destroyed, but abandoned. White's eyes darted across the camp. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just emptiness. Then he saw it, carved deep into a wooden post, CROATOAN. On another tree, the letters CRO, nothing more. It wasn't a random word. It was the name of a nearby island, home to friendly native allies known as the CROATOAN tribe. White's heart raced. Was it a message? A clue? Had his people relocated there, waiting for him? He wanted to sail there immediately. But a violent storm struck that very night, tearing his ship's anchor loose and driving the vessel far from shore. The crew refused to return, fearing shipwreck. White begged them, but the sea had made its decision. He was forced to sail back to England, alone, broken, and tormented by questions that would never be answered. His daughter. His granddaughter. His colony. Gone, into the mist of history. And thus, the dream that began with courage and hope was swallowed by silence. The Lost Colony of Roanoke became a ghost story, one whispered for centuries across the waves, a riddle that time itself refuses to solve. The year was 1590, and after a 3-year storm of wars, delays, and restless hope, John White had finally returned to the New World, to Roanoke. What should have been a homecoming felt instead like the prelude to a ghost story. As the small boat cut through the gray waters toward Roanoke Island, White's eyes scanned the distant shore. His heart pounded with both fear and anticipation. Somewhere beyond that line of trees, he imagined his daughter Eleanor Dare rushing out to meet him, baby Virginia toddling at her side, 3 years older now, maybe speaking her first words. He clung to that vision. He needed to believe it. But the island waited in silence. No signal fires burned. No voices called back across the water. Only the wind, whispering through the pines like the murmur of ghosts. As White and his men landed, a chill crept through them. The settlement that once bustled with life now lay in ruin. The wooden palisade stood, but barely. The houses had been dismantled, not burned or destroyed in rage, but carefully taken apart, as though the colonists had left willingly, deliberately. There were no signs of struggle, no bones, no blood. Only the heavy stillness of abandonment. John White called out, his voice echoing through the trees, "Eleanor." "Virginia." No answer came, only the sound of waves lapping against the empty shore. Then one of his men shouted. They had found something, a carving on a sturdy post. CROATOAN. The word was etched deep, the letters deliberate, clear, a message, perhaps a sign of hope. White's heart leapt. "CROATOAN," he whispered. It was the name of a nearby island, today known as Hatteras Island, home to the CROATOAN people, a friendly tribe who had once traded with the English. Before White's departure, he had told the colonists that if they ever moved, they should carve the name of their new location somewhere visible. If they were in danger, they were to carve a cross above it. There was no cross. No sign of distress. Hope flickered to life in White's chest. Maybe, just maybe, they had survived. Perhaps they had moved south to CROATOAN Island, built a new life there, waiting for him to return. But fate, as always, was merciless. That night, as White's men prepared to sail to CROATOAN, a fierce storm rolled in from the Atlantic. The sea roared like a living thing, tossing their ship like a toy. The anchor line snapped, and the vessel was driven far from shore. For days, the storm raged, cutting them off from the island. The crew, exhausted and fearful, refused to return. They were privateers, not settlers, their mission had never been rescue but profit. They wanted to go home. White pleaded, begged them to turn back, but the captain refused. Supplies were low, and the weather worsened. To linger meant death. And so, White was forced to abandon his search. His eyes filled with tears as he watched the coastline fade into the mist, the word CROATOAN burning in his mind like a brand. He returned to England, a broken man, haunted by the silence of that empty colony. For the rest of his life, he lived with the question that has outlived centuries: what happened to them? Some said the colonists were taken in by the CROATOAN tribe, marrying and merging their lives into native culture. Others believed they had perished from starvation, disease, or conflict. Still others whispered darker theories, of raids, betrayal, or an exodus into the wild that ended in despair. But no one ever found their bodies. No graves. No ruins. Nothing. Only a single word carved in wood, a word that became the echo of a vanished world. CROATOAN. To this day, the Lost Colony of Roanoke remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of history, a story of hope, loss, and a silence that refuses to fade. Years turned into decades. Decades into centuries. And still, the mystery of Roanoke refused to fade. Historians, explorers, and dreamers alike searched for answers, but the truth seemed always just beyond reach, like a shadow vanishing at dawn. The lost colony had become more than a tragedy, it had become a question whispered across time: what happened to them? Some believe that the colonists, desperate and hungry, turned to their neighbors, the CROATOAN tribe, and were absorbed into their community. This theory, the most hopeful, paints a picture of survival through unity, of two cultures meeting not as enemies, but as one. Later European settlers reported seeing Native Americans with gray eyes and English features, lending a haunting hint that the Roanoke settlers may have lived on through their descendants. Others hold darker theories. Some claim the settlers perished in the wild, lost to famine and disease, their bones buried beneath the Carolina sands. A few suggest that they were victims of violence, attacked by hostile tribes or Spanish raiders who sailed north from Florida. And then there are the more mysterious speculations, that the colonists fled inland, trying to find a better place, only to vanish in the forests, their trail erased by time and nature itself. In the centuries since, archaeologists have found clues, but never closure. Fragments of English tools, broken pottery, and European-style artifacts scattered across the region hint that some may indeed have survived, interwoven with native communities. But no single discovery has ever told the full story. Perhaps that's what makes the tale of Roanoke so enduring, not just the loss, but the silence. The ocean swallowed their footprints, the forest reclaimed their homes, and history itself turned the colony into legend. And yet, within that silence lies a lesson deeper than the mystery. The Lost Colony was more than an experiment in settlement, it was a symbol of human courage, and the price of ambition. Those 117 souls who crossed the Atlantic in fragile wooden ships were driven by hope, the hope to build a new life in an unknown world. They faced storms, hunger, and fear, but they dared to try. In their disappearance, we find not just sorrow, but a reflection of our own journey through the unknown. Every great leap in history, every voyage, invention, or discovery, carries the same risk that they faced, the possibility of failure, the shadow of mystery. The story of Roanoke reminds us that some answers are not meant to be found, and that sometimes, what endures longer than truth is the question itself. Because questions keep us searching. They keep us curious. They keep history alive. And perhaps, somewhere in the whisper of the waves along North Carolina's coast, or in the flicker of campfire smoke rising through the pines, the lost colony of Roanoke still speaks, not in words, but in wonder. For in the end, the greatest mystery is not where they went, but what they left behind. A story that refuses to die.